Auric Hale had been sitting in the quiet corner of the Thrixian Palace library, surrounded by floating shelves of crystal tablets, translating an ancient ceremonial script. He liked this corner, away from the constant echo of alien footsteps. In the grand halls, away from the endless golden light that streamed through the palace's transparent dome. He was halfway through a tricky sentence when a deep chiming sound filled the air. The sound was soft but carried a strange weight. It made the hairs on his arms stand up. A palace attendant approached. She was Thrixian, tall, elegant, with silver markings along her temples that shimmered as she moved. Her voice was calm but firm. "Scholar Hale, the Queen summons you." Auric blinked. "Me?" "The Queen does not repeat herself," the attendant said. He gathered his translation pad and tried to ask more questions, but she simply turned and began walking, her long robe whispering over the polished crystal floor. Auric followed. They passed through corridors lined with tall windows, showing the Thrixian capital, a city of spires and silver bridges, all lit by a pale blue sun. Skycraft drifted slowly between towers, and the streets far below moved in careful, flowing patterns. Auric had never seen traffic so silent. The deeper they went into the palace, the more guarded it became. Towering soldiers in white and gold armor stood at attention, their weapons humming faintly. Each set of doors they passed was more ornate than the last, until they reached two massive gates carved with swirling constellations. The doors opened on their own. The throne hall was enormous. Sunlight poured through the dome high above, catching on hundreds of hanging crystal threads that filled the air with a slow, shifting glow. The walls were carved with images of stars, battles, and great winged creatures. A wide carpet of deep blue ran from the entrance to the dais at the far end, and there, on the dais, sat Queen Vera. Even among Thrixians, she was striking. Her armor was ceremonial, plates of white crystal edged with gold, shaped to follow the lines of her tall frame. A cloak of silver fabric pooled around her feet. Her eyes, a deep violet, fixed on Auric the moment he stepped into the hall. Hundreds of Thrixian nobles stood along the sides, their voices hushed. Auric felt every one of them watching him. He swallowed hard. The attendant led him forward until they stood a respectful distance from the throne. Then she stepped back, leaving him alone in the center of the carpet. Queen Vera rose, her voice carried easily across the hall, clear and steady. "Auric Hale of Earth." Her tone made his name sound like part of a royal decree. "You came to this palace as a student of words. You have served quietly. You have shown skill in the study of our ancient tongue." Auric felt his shoulders tense. This sounded almost like a commendation, but why would the queen herself care? She took one step down from the dais, her cloak rippling. "I have considered many choices. I have weighed many fates, and today I choose this. You will be my mate." The hall went completely silent. Auric's mind went blank for a moment, then rushed with thoughts all at once. Mate? He thought maybe. He had misheard, but the sharp intake of breath from some of the nobles told him otherwise. "Your Majesty," he began carefully, "I think there may be some misunderstanding." The Queen's gaze was calm but unshakable. "Your protests mean nothing, human. The bond is declared. It will be sealed." It wasn't anger in her voice. It wasn't even impatience. It was certainty, as if she had already looked into the future and seen it decided. From the sides of the hall, he could feel the stares, some curious, some cold. The nobles began murmuring in low tones. Auric caught a few words in Thrixian, phrases like unprecedented and dangerous. He cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, with all respect, humans and Thrixians don't usually—" She raised one hand slightly and he stopped speaking. It wasn't fear that silenced him, it was the weight of the moment. She stepped closer, until she was only a few paces away. "You have not yet seen what I have seen," she said softly, for his ears alone. "And you do not yet know why I have chosen this." Her tone shifted back to formal as she addressed the hall. "Let it be recorded. Auric Hale of Earth will be bonded to me, Queen Vera of the Thrixian Empire. This is my will, and it will stand." A ceremonial gong sounded somewhere high above, sealing the declaration. Auric stood frozen, his mind still trying to catch up. The queen turned and walked, back up the dais, sitting once more upon the throne. Her violet eyes met his one last time. "You will be summoned again, human. Prepare yourself." The attendant returned to his side, bowing slightly to the queen before gesturing for Auric to follow. The noble's murmurs followed him all the way out of the hall. As they walked back through the palace corridors, Auric tried to make sense of what had just happened. He had come here as a linguist, not a diplomat, not a soldier. His job was to study words, not become part of an empire's political structure. Yet something told him this was not just about ceremony or tradition. The queen had chosen him for a reason, and whatever that reason was, it was far more dangerous than a simple misunderstanding. He looked once more at the strange beauty of the Thrixian city beyond the windows, feeling its quiet order, its impossible grace. Somewhere in that calm, a storm was gathering, and somehow he had just been placed at its center. When Auric Hale returned there the next morning, the floating shelves and soft light from the crystal dome seemed different, too bright, too still. He kept catching the eyes of attendants and junior scribes who quickly looked away. Word had spread. He sat at his usual desk, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the throne hall. Every detail replayed. The queen's steady voice, the noble's murmurs, the sound of the ceremonial gong. It didn't make sense. He had been in the palace for 8 months, studying ancient Thrixian texts, helping the cultural archives catalog forgotten phrases. He had met the queen only once before, during a formal greeting. There had been no sign she even remembered him. Now the whole empire seemed to know his name. He tried to focus on his work, but failed. Finally, he closed his translation pad and decided he needed answers. The palace library was connected to a small scholars' wing where researchers lived. Auric went there, looking for the only person who might be willing to talk to him, Master. Scholar Denath, a pale-skinned Thrixian with long silver hair who had once studied on Earth. He found Denath in a study room, arranging thin crystal tablets into neat rows. The older Thrixian glanced up. "Ah, Hale, I hear you had an eventful audience yesterday." Auric gave a short, uneasy laugh. "You could say that. Denath, I need to understand what happened. This mate thing, can I just refuse?" Denath stopped arranging the tablets. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed and gestured for Auric to sit. "You are asking about the bonding oath." Auric nodded. "In our law," Denath continued, "when a reigning queen declares a bond, it is absolute. There is no ceremony that allows refusal, no legal step to undo it. It is older than the empire itself, older than our recorded history." Auric leaned forward. "But what if the chosen person doesn't agree? What if they just leave?" Denath's eyes darkened. "If you were Thrixian, leaving would be considered treason. If you are human—" He paused. "It would be seen as an insult to the entire empire. The result would almost certainly be political conflict between your people and ours." Auric stared. "So, this isn't just a personal thing, it's political." "Everything in the palace is political," Denath said simply. "And the queen has never chosen a non-Thrixian before. This is unprecedented." Auric ran a hand through his hair. "She didn't even explain why. She just said I'd see what she's seen." Denath gave a faint smile. "Then perhaps you should ask her directly. It wasn't that simple. The Queen's schedule was tightly controlled, and ordinary scholars didn't just ask to see her. But the next few days, Auric found that he no longer moved through the palace unnoticed. Guards nodded as he passed. Attendants whispered in corners. A few nobles gave him long, measuring looks. On the fourth day, a young attendant named Sirah found him in the gardens. "Her Majesty requests your presence in the solarium," she said. The solarium was a circular chamber high in the palace's central spire. It was made entirely of transparent crystal, so that standing inside felt like floating above the city. When Auric arrived, the Queen was alone, looking out at the pale blue sun hanging low over the horizon. She didn't turn when he entered. "You have questions, human," she said. Auric stepped closer, feeling the faint warmth of the sunlight through the crystal walls. "Yes. Why me? Why this bond?" The Queen finally turned. Her violet eyes were calm, but there was something behind them, a weight, as if she had been carrying a secret for too long. "The Dominion Council grows restless," she said. "They have power in the outer provinces. They whisper that my rule is weak. They plan to remove me." Auric frowned. "What does that have to do with me?" "The Council understands the minds of my people. They predict every move I make. But human minds work differently. You think around the rules, not only through them. By binding you to me, I bring something unpredictable into the heart of my court. Something they cannot calculate." Auric hesitated. "So, this is a strategy." "It is survival," she said. "And it is not without risk. Many will see you as a threat. Some will try to use you. Others will try to remove you entirely." He crossed his arms. "And you didn't think I might want a choice in this?" The Queen studied him for a moment. Then she said quietly, "If I had asked, would you have said yes?" Auric opened his mouth, then closed it again. She gave a small nod, as if that had been answer enough. "You may not yet trust me, human, but you will see why this was necessary." The conversation ended as abruptly as it began. Back in his quarters, Auric thought about her words. If what she said was true, then refusing the bond, or even trying to delay it, could create a political disaster. But accepting meant stepping into the middle of a power struggle he barely understood. That night, he wandered the quieter halls of the palace, passing the guarded council chambers and the long gallery of past rulers. Each portrait seemed to watch him as he passed. By the time he returned to his room, one thing was clear. The Queen's choice had already set things in motion. He could either try to fight it, or start learning the rules of this dangerous new game. And if Danath was right, the first rule was simple. In the Thrixian court, nothing was ever as it seemed. Auric Hale could feel a change in the way the palace moved around him. The attendants spoke less in his presence. The guards at the gates watched him longer than before. Even in the library, where voices were always soft, he felt the weight of eyes on his back. He tried to bury himself in work, translating a set of ceremonial speeches from the first age of the Empire, but his thoughts kept circling back to Queen Vera's words. "They cannot calculate you." That might have been true, but it didn't explain everything. If this was only a political move, why choose him? There were other humans in the capital, diplomats, traders, military advisors. Any of them would have been a stronger public symbol. Yet the Queen had chosen a linguist who preferred dusty library, shelves to public halls. Something was missing from the story. Late one afternoon, as the pale blue sun dipped low, a message crystal appeared at his desk. It glowed softly, carrying a single sentence. "Come to the East Garden at moonrise." No signature, no seal. But Auric knew who it was from. The East Garden was a place he had only seen from a distance, a private section of the palace grounds, shielded by high walls of living vines. When he arrived, the sky was deep indigo, and the first stars had appeared above the crystal dome. The garden was lit by hundreds of floating lanterns, each shaped like a delicate sphere of glass. The queen was waiting by a small pool, her cloak of silver fabric catching the light. She was without her ceremonial armor, wearing instead a simple robe of dark blue. "You came," she said, her voice calm. "I don't exactly have the freedom to say no, do I?" Arik replied. Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but close. "You have more freedom than you think, human." He stepped closer, careful to keep a respectful distance. "If you want me to trust you, then tell me the whole truth. Why me? And don't just say it's because I think differently." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she looked down at the water, watching the ripples from a drifting leaf. "5 cycles ago," she began, "I led an expedition into the edge systems, places where our maps are incomplete, where no law truly holds. We found something." Her voice lowered slightly, as if the vines themselves might be listening. It was an object, no larger than a human's hand, made of a material our science could not identify. It pulsed with energy, and it spoke, though not in words. It projected thoughts, images. Arik's brow furrowed. "What kind of images?" "A war. One not yet fought, worlds burning, fleets destroyed. In the center of it I saw a figure, human, not Thrixian. And though the face was unclear, the voice spoke your name." Arik blinked. "My name?" "Yes," she said. "It told me you would stand at the turning point between victory and ruin, that only by binding you to me could the balance be kept." He stared at her, trying to read her expression. "So, this is about some kind of prophecy?" Her eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "I do not believe in prophecy, but I do believe in warnings, and I know what I saw. Since that day, I ordered my scholars to search our records for your name. They found your work in the translation archives, your record of service in the diplomatic corps. You were already here in my palace. I took that as a sign to act." Arik let out a slow breath. "And you didn't think telling me any of this sooner might be important? Would you have believed me?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. Maybe not. But it would have been better than just dropping it on me in front of the entire court. The faint curve returned to her lips. It was the only way to make the bond unquestionable. The council would never allow a private agreement. They walked slowly along the garden path. Lantern light flickered across the queen's face, making her seem almost human for a moment, just a leader carrying a burden no one else could see. "You think I am only protecting myself," she said. "But the truth is more complicated. The Dominion Council grows bolder by the day, and now there are whispers of a fleet gathering beyond our borders. If the object's vision is true, we may not have long before that war comes." Arik stopped walking. "And you think I'm supposed to stop it?" "I think you are meant to be here when the choice is made. The object showed me 2 paths. In one, you were beside me. In the other, you were not, and the Empire burned." The words hung in the cool night air. Finally, Arik shook his head. "I came here to study languages, not to become part of an Empire's survival plan. I don't even know your politics, your military, your—" "Then you will learn," she said firmly, "and I will teach you." When they returned to the edge of the garden, she paused before the gate. "You still think I chose you," she said. "But perhaps the truth is that something else chose both of us." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her silver cloak vanishing into the shadows between the lanterns. That night, Arik lay awake in his quarters, staring at the faint glow of the city beyond the window. His mind replayed her words, over and over. If she was telling the truth, then his life had been caught in something far larger than a political game. If she was lying, then she had just found a very clever way to keep him exactly where she wanted him. Either way, there was no going back to the quiet work of the library. Somewhere, out beyond the shining towers and silent skycraft, a war might be waiting. And if the Queen was right, his place in it was already decided. The room was shaped like a half-circle, with high, arched windows that looked out over the Thrixian capital. The walls shimmered faintly, alive with streams of recorded light, a sign that everything said here was being archived for the royal. Record.12 members of the Dominion Council sat in curved seats that rose in height from the center outward, like judges in an ancient court. They wore long robes of black and silver, each with a different crest stitched over the heart. Their expressions were polite, but their eyes carried the weight of calculation. Queen Vera sat at the head, her silver cloak draped over her throne-like seat. Auric stood at her right side, feeling the pressure of the council's collective gaze. "We welcome you, human," said the eldest counselor, a tall figure with pale skin and eyes the color of deep water, though some might question why you stand within this chamber at all. Auric didn't miss the way several counselors nodded in silent agreement. The Queen's voice was calm. "He stands here because he is my chosen bondmate. His counsel will be heard." The words echoed in the chamber. Auric could almost hear the ripple of disapproval beneath the council's stillness. Another counselor leaned forward, fingers tapping the armrest of his seat. "Your Majesty, the bond is your right. But inviting an outsider, one who has not served in our military, who knows nothing of our law, into the affairs of the Empire, this is dangerous." Vera's tone sharpened. "Dangerous to whom?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Auric realized this was not just a meeting. This was a test for both of them. The Queen was watching how he would handle himself in front of her enemies. So he stepped forward slightly. "If I may speak," he began, his voice steady. "It's true I'm not Thrixian. I don't know all your customs, but maybe that's the point. If I think differently, I might see problems and solutions you might overlook." A counselor with gold-marked temples gave a small, sharp laugh. "And what solutions could a scholar of words offer to the Empire's problems?" Auric kept his tone polite. "The same kind of solutions that have kept my people alive through centuries of war, politics, and alliances. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one your enemy doesn't expect." That made a few counselors exchange glances. He could tell some were unimpressed, but others were at least curious. The Queen spoke again, her voice like cool metal. "We face unrest in the border provinces. Supply routes are being disrupted. A fleet of unknown origin has been sighted near the edge systems. I will have this council's advice." The counselors began to speak in turn, offering strategies, each more rigid and predictable than the last. Military deployments, tightened border control, economic sanctions. Auric listened quietly, his mind turning over the information. He recognized a flaw. "If I may," he said once the room grew quiet, "you all assume the fleet near the edge is hostile. But what if they're testing your reaction? If you respond with warships, you confirm you see them as enemies. That could turn a test into a real threat." The eldest counselor's eyes narrowed. "You suggest we do nothing?" "I suggest," Auric said carefully, "that you send something unexpected. A merchant convoy escorted by only a token guard. If they're peaceful, they'll respond. If they're hostile, they'll attack the weaker target and reveal themselves before reaching your borders." Silence followed. It was the kind of silence that meant no one wanted to admit the outsider might have made sense. The Queen's gaze lingered on him, and he thought he saw the faintest approval in her eyes. One counselor finally said, "A risky plan, but perhaps worth considering." The eldest counselor's voice was cold. "It is unorthodox. We will think on it." When the meeting ended, the Queen rose. As she passed Auric, she spoke just loud enough for him to hear. "You have drawn their attention. That was the first move. Now be ready for the second. That second move came faster than he expected. Later that evening, as Arik crossed the palace's western hall, a figure stepped from the shadows. It was a young Thrixian woman in the uniform of a palace aide. She looked around quickly before speaking. "Human, walk with me and keep your voice low." Something about her tone told Arik this wasn't a casual conversation. They moved down a quieter corridor. "You were in the council today," she said. "You spoke well, but you should know. Some of them will not forgive you for it. They see you as a threat to their influence." Arik glanced at her. "And you're telling me this because I work for someone who believes you may be useful," she said. "The Dominion Council is not united. Some members are open to change. If you want allies, you'll need to choose them carefully." He stopped walking. "And who exactly is your employer?" She gave a small, sly smile. "When the time is right, you'll know. For now, be careful whose company you keep." That night, Arik stood by his window looking out over the city. The capital glittered under the pale light of the moon, calm and perfect on the surface. But now he could see the invisible lines of power stretching through it, lines he had already stepped across. The Queen had brought him into this game of shadows, but it was clear he would have to learn to play it himself. If the vision she had spoken of was real, then somewhere in this web of politics, betrayal, and hidden alliances lay the turning point she had seen, and he had just made his first move. It was the Night of Constellations, an annual festival when the palace opened its outer halls to the public. Hundreds of crystal lanterns floated in the air, each shaped like a star or moon, drifting gently along the wide garden paths. Music from long silver flutes echoed across the courtyard, mixing with the low hum of conversation. From the high balcony, Arik Hale watched the celebration below. The Queen stood beside him, dressed in a ceremonial gown of deep silver, the pattern of constellations woven into the fabric. Her violet eyes followed the moving lights. "This festival reminds my people of unity," she said softly. "It is why the council attends, so the public sees them as protectors of the empire." Arik glanced toward the far end of the courtyard, where members of the Dominion Council mingled in carefully formed groups. Even here, during a celebration, the lines between allies and rivals were easy to see. He had been told to enjoy the festival, but his instincts told him something was wrong. The air felt tight, like the moment before a storm. As the Queen stepped forward to greet a group of citizens, Arik moved toward the balcony's edge. He scanned the crowd. Guards in white and gold armor stood at their posts, but some positions seemed oddly placed. Too many in certain areas, too few in others. Then he noticed one of the palace gates closing. That was unusual. The festival gates stayed open until the final lanterns were released. Arik's pulse quickened. A sudden crash broke through the music. One of the crystal lantern towers at the courtyard's center shattered, sending shards of glowing glass across the stones. Gasps rose from the crowd. The Queen turned sharply. "What happened?" Before anyone could answer, the remaining gates slammed shut with a heavy clang. The guards nearest them turned, not toward the gates, but toward the palace. Arik understood instantly. They weren't protecting the Queen. They were moving against her. "Your Majesty, inside, now!" he shouted. But even as she turned toward the palace steps, a figure in dark armor stepped from the crowd, raising a weapon shaped like a curved staff. Energy crackled at its tip. The Queen's own guards rushed forward, clashing with the traitors. The air filled with the sound of weapons striking, the shimmer of energy shields flaring under attack. Arik grabbed a fallen guard's small wrist communicator. "Security Command, this is Hale. The courtyard is under attack. The gates are sealed. Send. Reinforcements to the Queen's position immediately," Static answered him. Either the signal was blocked, or the control room had already been taken. He turned back to see the queen surrounded by loyal guards, fighting to hold their position at the foot of the palace steps. The traitor forces were pressing hard, trying to cut her off from the entrance. Orcs scanned the area quickly. He spotted a series of decorative light pylons running along the courtyard wall. They weren't strong weapons, but each one contained a power core capable of producing a blinding flash if overloaded. He ran toward the nearest pylon, ducking under the arc of a swinging staff weapon. Pulling open the small access panel, he found the control node. His fingers moved quickly, bypassing the safety limiters he had learned about during his time in the engineering archives. The pylon flared, sending a sudden burst of white light across the courtyard. Traitor guards near it stumbled, covering their eyes. Arik moved to the next pylon, repeating the process. One by one, sections of the courtyard became difficult for the attackers to navigate. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it created openings for the loyalists to push forward. The queen's voice cut through the chaos. "Hail, behind me!" He ran to her side just as a second wave of attackers poured in from the far gate, weapons raised. The loyal guards were tiring. Arik knew they wouldn't hold without a shift in momentum. "Your Majesty, we need to break." "Their focus," he said quickly. "If they're following orders, their leader has to be here somewhere." Her eyes narrowed. "Then find them." Arik scanned the crowd again. The traitors fought in a pattern, pushing from two sides but leaving the center path mostly clear. That meant the leader would be in a position to oversee both flanks. There, a figure standing atop the broken lantern tower giving sharp hand signals. His armor was marked with the gold and black crest of a senior officer. Arik didn't think. He sprinted toward the tower, weaving between dueling guards. Twice, he had to dive out of the way as energy bolts scorched the stone near his feet. He reached the base of the tower and began climbing the shattered structure, ignoring the sting of small cuts from the crystal shards. The officer spotted him and drew a blade that hummed with low power. "You shouldn't be here, human," the officer growled. "Too late for that," Arik said, and grabbed a length of loose support wire from the broken lantern. The officer swung the blade, but Arik ducked and looped the wire around the man's arm, pulling hard. The sudden jerk threw the officer off balance. Before he could recover, Arik shoved him backward. The officer fell from the tower, hitting the courtyard stones with a heavy thud. The effect was immediate. Without their leader's signals, the traitor forces hesitated. The queen's guards surged forward, forcing them back toward the gates. Loyal soldiers arriving from the inner halls finally broke through the sealed doors, adding fresh strength to the defense. Within minutes, the remaining attackers were either captured or retreating into the shadows beyond the palace walls. The courtyard was a mess of broken lanterns, fallen weapons, and injured guards. The festival's music had stopped completely, replaced by the low hum of the palace security fields reactivating. The queen stepped down from the palace steps, her cloak trailing across the stones. She looked at Arik, her expression unreadable. "You acted without hesitation," she said. "That is what kept this from becoming a slaughter." Arik wiped the sweat from his brow. "I acted because I saw an opening. That's all." Her violet eyes held his for a long moment. "That is all the difference between victory and defeat." As the injured were carried away and the courtyard began to clear, Arik realized something important. The attack hadn't been meant to overthrow the queen outright. It had been a test, a show of force by the Dominion Council's enemies. And now, after this night, they would see him not just as an outsider, but as a problem. The queen's earlier warning echoed in his mind. That was the first move. Now be ready for the second. He had no doubt the next move was already being planned. Where once the halls had been full of festival chatter, now they were guarded by silent sentries. Patrol routes doubled. Checkpoints appeared where there had been none before. Even the soft glow of the wall lamps seemed sharper, less warm. Arik. Hale walked the marble corridors, noticing how the courtiers' eyes followed him. Some nodded respectfully, Others watched him with open suspicion. Word had spread quickly. He had helped the Queen survive the coup attempt. But in the political world of the Dominion, saving a life didn't always mean earning trust. He was summoned to the Queen's private audience chamber in the early evening. The room was smaller than the grand throne hall, lit by only a few tall lamps. The floor was inlaid with a star map, each planet marked with silver. Queen Vera stood near the window, her back to him, looking out over the city. "The council meets tomorrow," she said, her voice low but clear. "They will demand answers. They will want a list of names, traitors, sympathizers, anyone they can punish." Auric stopped a few paces behind her. "Will you give it to them?" She turned, her silver cloak shifting in the dim light. "Some names, yes, but the truth is harder. The attack was not the work of one faction. It was an alliance of smaller ones, bound by fear and opportunity." "Fear of you?" he asked. Her eyes held his. "Fear of change, fear of what I might do with you at my side." Silence hung between them for a moment. Then she spoke again. "You have a choice, Auric Hale. I brought you here because of the vision I saw, but I will not hold you against your will. If you want to leave the capital, leave the bond, I will allow it. You can be returned to your own world, unharmed." Auric felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just an offer. It was a test of his loyalty. He looked toward the window, seeing the city lights stretching into the distance. "If I leave, what happens to you?" She did not answer right away. "The council will close ranks. My reforms will slow. The enemies we faced last night will grow bolder, and when the next strike comes, I may not survive it." Auric thought of the council chamber, of the festival, of the way the Queen had stood her ground under attack. He remembered her warning. Be ready for the second move. Leaving would mean safety, but it would also mean walking away from the one person who had trusted him when no one else in this empire had. He turned back to her. "If I leave, I'm safe. If I stay, I'm a target." "That is the truth," she said softly. "Then I'll stay," he replied. "Because you're right. Change is coming, and I'm not about to watch it happen from light years away." For the first time that evening, her expression softened. "You understand what that means?" He gave a small, wry smile. "It means I just made a lot more enemies." The next day, the Dominion Council chamber was packed. Not just the 12 counselors, but senior military officers, trade guild leaders, and high-ranking scholars filled the tiered seats. Queen Vera entered first, regal and calm. Auric followed at her side, the whisper of conversations breaking across. The room like ripples on water. The eldest counselor rose. "Your Majesty, the attack on the Night of Constellations was an insult to the Dominion. We demand justice." The Queen's voice was steady. "Justice will be served, but we will not descend into blind purges. Those guilty will face trial. Nothing more, nothing less," several counselors muttered in disapproval. "And the human?" one asked sharply. "What role did he play in this survival of yours?" Vera glanced toward Auric. He saw what others did not. He acted when others hesitated. Without him, the Dominion would have woken to a palace in enemy hands. That caused a stir. Some voices called it luck, others called it dangerous. Auric stepped forward. "Counselors, I'm not here to take power from anyone, but I won't apologize for helping keep your queen alive. The people outside these walls, they saw the gates close and the traitors fall back. They'll remember that. And maybe they'll remember that it was possible because someone acted instead of debating." He didn't raise his voice, but the words carried. The chamber fell into uneasy silence. The eldest counselor leaned forward. "Human, you are bold. Boldness can build empires, or burn them." Auric met the man's gaze. "Then I'll try to make sure it does the first, not the second." The Queen's violet eyes glimmered. She rose to her full height. "The council will reconvene in 3 days. Until then, this chamber is adjourned." That evening, the Queen and Auric stood again on the balcony overlooking the city. The streets were calmer now, the lanterns from the festival long gone. "You know," Auric said, "on my world, we have a saying, if you're going to be in the storm, you might as well learn how to sail." Her lips curved faintly. "Then we will sail together," Auric hailed. Far below, the lights of the city seemed to shift, forming patterns like constellations. Somewhere out there, the next challenge was already moving toward them. But for now, they stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. And for the first time since his arrival, Auric felt certain. He was exactly where he was meant to be,